Good morning, everyone. I want to start by saying how truly grateful I am and how touched I am inside of the many words, kind words, that's been expressed since yesterday and then to this morning as well as I came in on yesterday's presentation. I am deeply touched. It confirms perhaps, well, not perhaps, it confirms to a very large extent my purpose here. So I thank you for that. But I think it also validates our time and our purpose here at this 135th Synod of the Diocese of Ottawa. The theme that we're talking about is walking in your way to justice and wholeness. And yesterday I spent time talking about walking in my way, my inward journey, the journey that I have not traveled that far in this world, believe me. It was only when we got to our late 40s and 50s that Jean and I ventured out of Canada. And we haven't really gone very far. But having said that, even if we were to travel to distant lands, the journey that I took in search of my own reality cannot be matched by any earthly journey that I would have taken. It is my greatest journey that I have taken. And I have shared that with you in my search of who I am, in my search of my very essence of who I am as a Cree person. When I asked my mother, am I a person? Am I Cree? This has been my passion. This has been my passion. And this passion was not a passion that was of my own. It's a passion of others as well. It's a passion of other people of my generation, and certainly a passion of younger people coming up. It's probably your passion as well. It's a passion of a man that I met in 1972 who came up as a young man to teach our young children, a man by the name of John Long. And he came as a teacher from Southern Ontario, right out of Teachers College, and he taught our children. His job was to teach our kids, my kids. And he took that job as being one with great responsibility. And his passion was to understand who we were. And he devoted a great portion of his life in understanding and sitting with the elders. And I call him my brother. My brother. I taught with him as a teacher. I worked for him as my principal. We taught together in high school. And he worked for me as well. So we did all kinds of things together over a span of some 20 years. And this past March, I sat by his bedside while he drew his last breath. My brother John. He had asked me at one point to write a foreword to his book, Treaty 9, because he understood what our people said the treaty was all about. And he could read very well what the treaty said, and it clashed there. My brother John. So I dedicate these talks to my brother John. And where Mr. Goshugagi Beje, we tabi Magoyak, Kyochikiskana Hamot, the Josh Missionanak, He became one of us. He became one of us. He had this passion in his heart. So I dedicate my talks to my brother John. This morning I will speak on the other half of the theme of justice and wholeness. Walking to justice and wholeness means that we've departed. We have departed from a past of injustice and a past of brokenness. There is a history here. There is a history, and we've been recounting that history at each prayer session in our liturgy, in your liturgy, which I find so awesome. There is a history here, and I would like to share some of it with you. Some of that history from where I come from. We prayed Thursday night. They bought their Bibles and their faith. Remember that? The Thanksgiving over the water. They bought their Bibles and their faith. What did they see? What did they encounter? They saw us. They saw us. They saw us in terms of who we were and how we survived. They saw our social fabric, our economic fabric, our spiritual fabric. But they came with their Bible and their faith. And who were these people that came? Well, let me tell you a little bit of a historical background. Sometime in 1686, there was a company led by Chevalier de Troyes, who came by here in the Ottawa River in March, April, heading to James Bay to capture Moose Fort and the Hudson's Bay Post. And they arrived in Moose Factory, at Moose Fort, and they captured this. I believe they said they never even fired a round in capturing the fort. It was that easy. I guess they might have been asleep or something, all 16 of them. But they captured it. And they captured also the Fort Rupert on the Rupert side. And they took one of their ships and they went over to the Albany side. And they captured that one as well. The French. And with that company of people, troops, if you will, there was one. Mechotechone, we call him. Mechotechone, the black robe, a Jesuit. His name was Father Antoine Sylvie. And Father Antoine Sylvie writes in his journals about the land of our people and the task in conquering and having that part of the country as theirs. It says, "It is scarcely possible that one can soon make Christians of them." Why? Because it is such a dark and desolate land. We have this saying in Cree, when we say, "How old are you?" we say, "Dandas to Bebenesian." Dandas to Bebenesian. And it has to do with seasons. It has to do with seasons. The season of, we have 6 seasons, not 4, we have 6 seasons. And the season of Bipun, winter, January, February, Kishe Bawa Taganam. And January and February, the harshest time of the year. If you can survive that harshest time of the year in January and February, you will see the geese return. In March, April, you have made it through, and there's bounty and harvest again for our people. That is the measure of our people. Danda Tubabenesian, how many winters have you survived? How many winters have you survived? It is scarcely probable that one can soon make Christians of them. It is too harsh a land. And he left. This black robe, he left. 1686. In 1713, the Treaty of Utrecht is signed, and all the posts go back to the English. Albany, Rupert, Moose, and others have been captured by the French. And the Hudson's Bay view at that time, again, is the same. The nature of the country and service presents insuperable difficulties against sending missionaries. It's too difficult to send missionaries. Perhaps because maybe it was their excuse in saying that we can't be bothered with this. But the land was harsh. With the renewal of the charter, by the king at the time, it was a requirement. It was a discussion that took place between Parliament and the company, that the British Parliament, that there had to be a move. And the mission of Parliament and the company at the time was kind of like I call a double-edged mission, as my friend John would call it. He said the mission, the purpose would be to forestall the advance of Roman Catholicism by the French traders and the Jesuits. And we need to have missionaries come into Rupert's land. To favor monopoly of religion and to favor the monopoly of fur trade. We need to do this. And they struck an accord. You must bring missionaries over. And to promote this, they found that the response was by the Wesleyan Methodists, hence my name, Norm Wesley. Their creed was this: to promote the best interests of all classes of persons, but especially the Indian tribes. To the latter, your attention must be directed, and you must especially be spent for them. Your job is to look after them. That was the task. That was the charge by the company. It was agreed that would happen for the renewal of this charter in trading furs. And along came a 23-year-old young man. How many people here are 23? How many people here remember when they were 23? This young man, George Barnley, he comes into Moose Fort, a young man. His charge was to convert all of us to Christianity at 23 in this harsh, harsh land that we measure by how many winters that we survive. A century and a half almost after Father Antoine Sylvie leaves. That's his charge. And then others came with him. The other went to Norway House, Manitoba, and I believe his name was James Evans. And from there came the Cree-syllabic system of writing that we have adopted as ours. But George Barnley was there in our land, and he would go and baptize people. He would take 4 and say, your new name is no longer, your Indian name is Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Not surprising, huh? The first known Wesleys, 1842, Wapanwetam, he who you hear in the morning cry, is and his partner, his Squeshish young girl, are baptized and married in the same breath. Wapanwetam is renamed John Wesley. His Squeshish is renamed Susanna Wesley. And if you know your history, you know where those names come from. From the Wesleyan side. Not my Wesleyan side, their Wesleyan side. And so this all goes. The coming of the word, if you will. But unfortunately, this John Wesley, I'm sorry, unfortunately, this George Barnley, as young as he is gets mixed up with the Hudson's Bay Company and all the shenanigans that are going on there. And Governor Simpson says, get that guy out of here. So he's taken away. And my friend John Long, who did a story or a study on this, said that the conclusions of George Barnley's ministry is this: that James Bay Cree, in his move to convert them to Christianity, he said that James Bay Cree were not easily manipulated. And he concludes that the Cree were actors, not passive beneficiaries or victims. We weren't. When we went to church, we played church. When we went back to the land, we lived our lives. That was the result of that ministry. When he left, there was a need to replace George Barnley. And the story goes that in Exeter, England, there was a small band of young men whose hearts God has touched, and became very concerned about the souls of others in Exeter, but also in other parts of the world. And this one young man responded to the call by the Hudson's Bay Company, come over and help us minister to these people. So in August of 1851, John Horden, a catechist, arrives as a schoolmaster at Moose Fort, in Moose Factory. He is not a person of eminent position. He's just got this passion in his heart to mission to the people. And that he does. He does. He speaks the language. He speaks the language. Anonimo. When he prays, we understand how he prays. He teaches us. But he also says, what you are praying in your own way is not the way. It is our way. There is an interesting article entitled Net in the Bay. It's also subtitled A Journal of a Visit to Moose and Albany by Bishop of Rupert's Land. Who departs from the Red River area and Archbishop, I didn't write it down. Somebody tell me. Anderson, Archbishop Anderson, the Bishop of Rupert's Land. He leaves Red River settlement. He travels for 26 and a half days from Red River to Lac Seul, down the Albany River to Moose Factory to visit this John Horden guy in 1851. And he visits him in 1852. He visits him and see how he's making out, this young man. And he examines him. And he sees his ministry. This person who would eventually travel anywhere from 1,500 to 1,800 miles per year, venturing our land, visiting our people. He experiences a church service when the bell rings at 6:30 in the morning. Some 80 people gather, our people, Cree people, gather in that church in Moose Factory. And it swells to 120 people, almost half of the people that are here. And the worship is entirely Cree, all in Cree. Archbishop Anderson doesn't understand Cree. I don't think he did. But he was so impressed by this. And you have to and some of you have been to Moose Factory, and you will know that where the church is along the river. And you will know that along the river there was a settlement there of encampments in the summertime where our people camped. because we came from the land and we came to the settlement. And the smoke would rise and people would rise and would come to church 7 o'clock in the morning. And if you can imagine for a minute, I ask you to close your eyes and you can see that river from the church. And you can sense and you can see the people filing in to go to this service that they're called after the bell has rung for the last time. And the stillness of the reticence of the people. And they break out in song, a morning song. Wanishkagine belni koche hoji chikunabe. Tabatela muina naskum gagi ushisk. Not to Mugawase sustas kimachi gishigag. Tabwigin and askum the new town getche manitum. Who they especially bad the swiniki beshawian. Dato egi shigage showelemen. Dato e de biskage ganawelemen. All 120 of them singing that morning prayer. Deep, deep passion and faith in God. Deep, deep passion. And with that, Archbishop Anderson decides not to take another journey to Moose the next year. Before he leaves, he ordains John Horden into the ministry. Why is it so, why do we have this double-edged thing where we have this person who preaches the Word of God but says no to the kind of belief that we have? Why is it so easy for us to be converted to that? And I believe that the answer is fairly simple. That there was God inside our people, and they were readily able to accept the mission of Jesus Christ, the word of Jesus Christ into our heart, into their hearts. I come from a generation of people whose passion for Christ, whose passion for God through Christ is so deep. And I sing that song especially to demonstrate to you the depth of that passion that strikes into the heart of our people. We were true followers of Christ, though our way of life, in the form that was created by the Creator as we know Him, was condemned by the church, our traditional practice and our belief. Many became devout in their belief. And all through this and into the recent history, there comes this injustice and brokenness, and there are many stories of this you have heard. And I want to share with you 3 stories very quickly. There was this monument at St. Thomas Church that stands and lists close to 200 names of veterans from the First and Second War. They say that from our area, we have the highest per capita of people that enlisted into the First and Second War. It's called the First Nation Veterans of James Bay. Not far from there, a short stone's throw away, there was another monument that we dedicated 2 summers ago. It's entitled, Dedicated to the 7 Boys. After looking at this monument, the one that's dedicated to the First Nation veterans of James Bay, and the commitment that they made in going to fight for this country, we have this other stone dedicated to the 7 boys. The accident of July 9th, 1919, where 7 boys, ages 9 to the late teens, drowned after who were at Bishop Horton Memorial Residential School. Their boat capsized going some 400 yards across the Hayes Island in a rickety boat, unsupervised. All drowned. One of them being Harry Wesley, my father's younger brother. My father never spoke of that. He never told us that. I had to learn that, and I wonder why. I don't know. I can only surmise. And 2 years ago, we dedicated that monument as part of telling the truth. The truth is, this was not an accident. This was an incident. This was not an accident. This was an incident. This was, the word fails me. The word fails me. Accidents are things that happen where all precautions have been taken care of so that we won't have a tragedy. This was injustice, allowing unsupervised children in a rickety boat to venture out onto the waters. So we said, as we dedicated this, we take responsibility for as a church. This was not an accident, this was an incident. And we dedicated that. It's part of telling the truth and reconciling our past. The second story is about Evadne. And Evadne used to call me almost every second day, it seems. She's from Saskatchewan, 100 miles north of us. And she would speak to me in Cree, and he'd call me all the time. And he tells me this story about the time when he was in Bishop Horton Memorial Residential School, a young girl, a little girl. And she said, I remember that one day when I looked down the hall and I saw my brother. I saw my brother Sam, my older brother Sam, and I was so happy to see him there. And I started to call my brother Sam, and talking to him, speaking to him in Corsel Cree. And then, just out of nowhere, I felt a hand strike the back of my head and knock me to the ground. I was a little girl. And that was the principal of the school. He says, get up. If you wish to speak Cree, feel free to speak Cree. But this is the consequence. Evadne calls me, and she laments the fact that there is no minister in Saskatchewan. She's a devout believer in God through Christ. She has this experience in her youth, but somehow she's been able to reconcile this incident or these things that have happened in her life, and a strong believer, and she still wants to be part of us as an Anglican church. My sister and brother-in-law, their story, much the same. Indian day schools. You will see the class action on Indian day schools, and many of us, when we first heard this, and said, well, what's this all about? These kids had an opportunity to go home. But my sister went to an Indian day school, and not too long ago, as a matter of fact, within the last year, she shared with me her experience in Indian day schools. I was afraid, she says, I was afraid to go to school. Not only that, I was afraid to miss school. She was afraid to miss school because, as I said to you, my father said, you must go to school. And he was very stern with that. You must go to school. That boat, you got to fill it. So she would skip school And she dreaded the consequence of having to be found out that she would miss school. But she would dread also going to school because the teacher that taught them had an Indian name. His Indian name was Wholeness, the pervert. She was fearful to go to school. Though she went home every day, she was fearful. She was fearful to go home. She was fearful to go to school. That's the life, the double-edged life that she lived. My brother-in-law tells the story of Jimmy. And Jimmy has a withered hand. And he was born like that as a young boy. And Mr. Hazard, when we were in class as young boys, said, asked Jimmy to do something. I forget what it was. I forget the details of it, except to say that young Jimmy goes up with his withered hand, and Mr. Hazard thinks that young Jimmy is playing games. So he grabs him by the scruff of the neck, hauls him out into the hallway, and Wilbert said, and pardon the language, he beat the living crap out of Jimmy. And you could hear it in the halls. Jimmy is now in a senior's home in Timmins. And we worship and we break bread together. We break bread together. How do we reconcile our stay within the church? Well, I'll tell you, the difference between most of you and myself is that when I vest, I have difficulty vesting because I take on the image of these people who created and caused this brokenness and injustice. It took me a long time to feel comfortable in my vestments. I had to do things that would express who I am, not only as a clergy, but who I am as a Cree person. I need to do that. I need to do that for my own well-being, if you will. Many had passed through these clergy. And I'm reminded of Nirmal Mendes. Nirmal Mendes left us not too long ago, about 6 years ago. He was a Sri Lankan minister, very close friend of ours. And when he left, we roasted Nirmal in a parish hall. And we poked fun at him and did all kinds of silly things to him. And he got up to speak, and he said to us, in no uncertain terms, in a very quiet way, as Nirmal was, he would say, I am sorry. I am sorry if I have not fulfilled my expectation of my mission as a missionary to you. I am sorry if I have fallen short. I'm sorry if I've hurt you in the 4 years that I've been here. That's how we started. And I think about that and I say to myself, how different life would have been if all the people before him, right from the time of John Horton, had that same humility and passion in doing Christ's work. How different we would not be here talking about this, would we? We wouldn't. Perhaps not to the extent of which our hearts are heavy. Perhaps not to the extent that our hearts are burdened with brokenness and injustice in the past. Justice Sinclair calls this a cultural genocide. A cultural genocide, nothing short of that. John A. Macdonald, in his vision of Canada, the Dominion of Canada, building a railway from east to west and looks north, and he sees this Rupert's Land. He sees this Rupert's Land as a land that needs to be part of the Dominion, and he negotiates with Rupert's Land, the Hudson's Bay Company, for the purchase of this land. And in that purchase agreement, the Rupert's Land purchase, there's what they call the Rupert's Land Pledge, that the Dominion of Canada in that agreement is required to look the requirement is for the Dominion of Canada to look to and ensure the interest and well-being of the Indians in that project, and they agree to that. The interest and well-being of the Indians must be taken care of. This was the late 1800s. In 1905, we signed a treaty. All that land, legally now, does not belong to us. My father, my mother's father, signed his name to that, and the sign that he makes is not an X, it's a cross on the treaty. I've seen it. My children's grandfathers, my grandfather, my wife's grandfather, both signed that treaty. Brokenness, injustice. Our interest and well-being. What is our interest and well-being? It always has been the land. To be able to go to the land and feed us and clothe us and shelter us. It's been our survival. It's our way of life. It created who we were. What we were. All of this taken from us. My father being hauled into court for shooting a moose to feed his family in a bird sanctuary. Injustice, brokenness. All he wants to do is feed his family. And he shoots a moose in a bird sanctuary, and he's taken to court. All of these things. But there is hope, isn't there? And I want to share with you some of the hope. A number of years ago, as a special advisor to Mushkegowuk Council, I was called to a meeting. I was called to a meeting by a company known as De Beers Canada. I sat with them. I was sent there by Grand Chief Toby Beck. I went back and I told Toby, when he asked me, how did it go? I said to him, Toby, you know, the last time something as big as this happened was when Henry Hudson came around the strait. This is the next big thing. Diamonds, resource development, and mines. That was the next big thing. Unfortunately, the experience with the beers in Ottawapiskat is one that is not one that shines light in terms of what the new hope could be. The new hope is with the agreement that we as Moose Cree First Nation signed with the Ontario Power Generation in a redevelopment of the Moosonee complex, where we become partners on the revenue of the hydro dams on the electricity that we will consume in the province of Ontario. We share 25% of that revenue. That is the new hope. No more handouts. We live off the land in a different way. And the benefits of that will reap many times more than what the government is giving us in money these days. For the life of the dams, our interests, our well-being, that's the new hope. That's the new hope, revenue sharing. We need to go into that direction. You benefit from that revenue. We want to benefit from that revenue as well. In rebuilding who we are and restoring this brokenness and its injustice. The Primate's recent announcement in saying that it's time for us to convene some kind of gathering in 2017 to bring together people from all across the church who are interested in and committed to Indigenous ministries. I see this as a great hope, led by our Primate. He knows that there is a great struggle in restoring our faith and becoming strong Anglicans and expressing ourselves in the way in which you express yourself, plus how we see ourselves and want to express ourselves as Indigenous Anglicans. We need that. Our children need that. Our grandchildren need that. It's something that must be done. It is a great hope. The Primate's World Relief Development Fund vision to more partnerships with Indigenous communities, I see that as a great hope. They've done great things all across the world, and now they're focusing on Indigenous communities. That is a great hope. Kairos and the blanket exercise, the masses of that are being taught and educated about the history of this country, I see that as a great hope. Gord Downey, the secret path. People, we need more Gord Downeys. That is a great hope. That is a great hope. How do we move forward? The bishop's charge. We enter into uncharted waters. Those really struck so clear in my mind the other night. I said to myself, I couldn't have said it any better. Thank you, John. Thank you so much. We enter into uncharted waters. There is no mold. There is no mold to pour our desires into from the past, on your side or on our side. That's essentially what we were told a few nights ago. So let's get back to the boat. Remember the boat? Well, there is another, and it's filled with disciples. And in that boat filled with disciples, there is a raging storm. There is a tossing sea. And these are seasoned fishermen, people who spent their lives in that very sea, their livelihood, their interest and well-being. They're in danger, and they see this image walking on the water. Jesus, is it you? Is it you? Peter calls out, and Jesus says, come, come. And Jesus, I'm sure Peter must have had second thoughts, I don't know. But he believes. He steps out of the boat and he begins to walk on water. Uncharted waters he walks. And then he begins to see the raging storm and he begins to sink. We need to be Peter. We need to step out of the boat and walk on water in faith in Christ. Peter steps out of the boat. We need to step out of the boat. You need to step out of the boat. We need to step out of the boat and enter these uncharted waters. This call that the primate has to have as many people gather who are committed to Indigenous ministries on our side and your side is a great call. And it's a great hope. If there is commitment, if there is a desire, if there is a vision of Indigenous ministries, it's uncharted. There is no mold. To walk in a way of justice and wholeness, we need to be like Peter. We need to step out of the boat in faith, tough. Though we venture into uncharted waters, it's going to be a tough road. A tough road. Glenn Crombie, who was the president of Cambrian College when I was the dean there, he called me up to the third floor and he said, Norm, I need to talk to you. So I went up and he says to me, Norm, I can't seem to do anything right. And I recall why he said that, when he said that to me, because Glenn had this desire to do things right. And he had this council of advisors, Indigenous advisors within the college, and he had this desire to have outside of his office area 3 flags. One, the Ontario flag, the other, the fleur-de-lis, French-Canadian, and he had the desire to put a First Nation flag out there. And he asked his council, what do you guys think? And they said, good idea, Glenn. So he goes into his office, and he comes out and he unfurls this flag, and he says, what about this one? And the people just look at him and says, who is this guy? Why does he make decisions without consulting us? So the story there is, I tell Glenn, it's not what you do, Glenn. It's how you do it. It's how you do it. So as we enter these uncharted waters, it's not necessarily what we do, it's how we do these things. Stephen Charlson is a descendant of the Choctaw people and a bishop in the Episcopal Church in the U.S., and he writes, "It is not the mistakes we make, but the changes that count. The question is not whether we have ever turned in the wrong direction, because we have, all of us, but rather if we've turned in a new direction to change the things, we can amend the hurts we have caused. To seek forgiveness, we need to be whole in our journey. That takes courage," he says. It takes self-awareness, honesty, and accountability. In the end, we are renewed not because we have never fallen, but because we have always tried to stand up. No matter how difficult, no matter how long, grace is learning what it means to love. And I sense a deepening, growing love here in this room. And that will carry us forward. That will carry us forward. It's the hows. We say, journey with us, walk with us, walk with us, walk with us. The age-old question, who am I? Where do I come from? The last one is, where are we going? Where am I going? Well, I know where I want to go now that I know where I come from and know who I am. And let these words ring clear as we go forward. Remember who you are. Remember who you are. Gloria and I stood here and we talked this morning, and we reflected on the years gone by. And I said to her that sometimes I would wonder, why did it take me so long to respond to God's call to ordination? It's only been 3 years, and here I stand, 66 years old. Why did I take so long to do that? And it's kind of a bit of a lamenting that I have in my heart. And I come to the realization that the past is past. That's where I come from. This, for me, right now, is my fullness of time. It's Kairos. It's Kairos, my fullness of time. This gathering, I pray, is the fullness of your time. It's your Kairos. Remember who you are. It's not necessarily what you want to do. It's how you want to do it. Walk with us in your journey. Walk with us to justice and wholeness. Amen.